The camera inside this box is not what you think it is. This is the camera we have wanted Blackmagic to make with their pocket cameras since the very beginning.
What is that, Caleb?
This is just crazy. When we got this in the mail and Zach and I unpackaged this guy for the first time and got our hands on it, let me tell you, we were super hyped.
We were super excited about it, and we've had so much equipment come through the studio to be excited about. But for me, I think that this piece of gear was special just because it fixed so many of the issues that we were having with the pocket cameras. And because of that, I think this has to be my most anticipated piece of equipment for 2023.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That is the excitement level that we've had with this, because it is, again, this is fixing a problem that we've had since we bought the pocket cameras 5 years ago. I'm gonna open it up. I'm gonna show you guys what's inside and kind of what we're dealing with. So when you open it up, pretty simple, uses the same box, but you have something entirely different. This is just crazy. I mean, I told Zach when we were looking at this, and when I first saw it online, I thought, what kind of render is this? I didn't think it was a real product. What we have here is a modded 6K camera. Obviously, this can be done with the Pocket 4K as well. To talk about maybe why this came to be, I want to talk about some frustrations that we've had with the Pockets. Now, I just want to say that we love the Pocket cameras. Obviously, we wouldn't be shooting with them for the last 5 years if we didn't think they're great cameras. But there are frustrations we've had, annoyances, things that could have been fixed from a design standpoint and an ergonomic standpoint from the very beginning. We think this camera kind of fixes that stuff. So the first frustration we always had was the screen placement here on the Pockets honestly never made sense. The screen size, on the other hand, was great. We love the screen size. I mean, I think 5 inches is honestly a really great size when it comes to using for camera operating. It's not too small. It's not overly big and clunky. It's just big enough that you can see what you're doing, control the OS, and do what you need to do. I think it's the perfect size when it comes to cameras. But to put it on the back like this in a fixed screen fashion was so limiting. They made this great operating system. The Blackmagic OS is one of the biggest reasons we love shooting with their cameras, but then they put it on the back in a fixed screen so that if you ever shot a low angle, a high angle, if you ever wanted to put a V-mount on this, there were so many applications where you end up blocking the screen. I'm all for physical buttons, but when you have a touchscreen OS that works as well as it does, like Blackmagic has figured out here, and as quick as you can make adjustments, the thought that people block it with a battery blows my mind. If that isn't a big enough message to Blackmagic that says this doesn't work, I don't know what is. We have seen so many, countless posts of people with their rigged out Blackmagic pocket cameras with a V-mount blocking the amazing OS and the industry best camera OS software. It is crazy to me.
Yeah, honestly, the original design of this camera pretty much forced you to put an external monitor onto this camera. Like you said, if you wanted to get a low angle, you were having to get on the ground with this camera in order to see what you were doing. And then on top of that, if you did have an external monitor, you still can't really access your menu system from that display. So you're forced to go into the one that's baked into the back of the camera. It just makes it pretty difficult.
Yeah, and on top of that too, the other thing to note with it is these cameras, unlike the Ursa, really do rely on using the touchscreen. They do not have the button functionality of the Ursa. Yes, you can change things like the white balance, the shutter, ISO, certain things with that, and this little dial here. But beyond that, there's not like a ton you can do. You can't access the metadata. You can't access the menu. It is very limited. You do need to use the touchscreen, where the Ursa, you can be a little more flexible and actually access some of that stuff without using the touchscreen. But this camera and all their pockets, they don't have that. And so in my mind, to block the screen, it makes no sense. So these LPE6, and I know the new ones have NP batteries, but as Zach can attest to this, they both suck.
Yeah, not very reliable. I've been pulling out so many LPE6 and NPF batteries from our battery drawer, and they've just been draining in the drawer. I feel like I'm constantly pulling up batteries that are at like 50 to 40%, and they're pretty much worthless when you put them in the pocket camera because they'll just die immediately.
No, they're super unreliable, and that's been one of our biggest annoyances. That's what stops us from filming with it. Because if you're being hired on a job, yes, you can constantly be swapping, but if a camera drops to 20, 30%, you shouldn't have to question if it's randomly gonna power off, and that's what you have to do with these little batteries, because that happens. It is not feasible to have to swap them out at 50, 40% every time because, you know, you're paranoid about them randomly booting off. But again, there's no good way to put a V-mount battery on this. We've struggled with it. We've created videos about our builds on V-mount rigs. There's plenty of builds on these cameras because you have to use a V-mount on them. Otherwise, they're really not a great camera system, and no one wants to be walking around with 20 batteries in their pockets when they're out filming during the day.
Yeah, and I feel like we have tried so many different configurations of pocket cameras with V-mounts, and I feel like every single one of them is just not, it's not ideal. I mean, you put it on the bottom, which is probably the best out of the bunch, but it just makes it so tall. And if you put it off to one side on top of the camera, then it becomes unbalanced. It's just, I feel like we've never really been able to find the perfect configuration.
No, and we have literally, when I say we've tried everything with these cameras, Zach's right. We have tried finding, and even with these micro V-mounts, you'd think that you could find a more creative way to work around the screen being stuck right here. And let me tell you, it still ends up being awkward. Yes, people have talked about the box camera for a long time. I think at the core of it, the two things that the box form factor would fix are the screen placement and the battery choice. And that's why this is really cool. While this isn't a box, obviously, this is the original form factor. Kind of fixes those things, and that's why we're so excited about it. I don't think people want to just rig their cameras out for the sake of rigging. Sure, there are some people that do that, but I think it's really great when you can grab a camera and just start shooting. It's functional the way it is, and you don't have to spend time playing around with little aluminum pieces and parts and screws and everything, but you just have a functional camera. And I think that's why this is so exciting for us, is this camera is just a breath of fresh air with Blackmagic pocket cameras, because it just feels you ready to go. You grab a couple batteries, a lens, and this thing is just good to go. It's a beautiful thing. Again, I stand behind the fact that it's like, yes, you see people rig out pockets, but I don't think it's always just out of this deep desire to want to just rig it out. I think it's out of this desire that it needs to be functional. It needs to use V-mounts, and with that comes a crap load of stuff that it just makes it more of a hassle, and we just love that about this. I'm gonna give you a little backstory. A couple weeks ago, actually a couple months ago, I was on the Blackmagic forums and I saw someone post a picture of this right here. And when I first saw it, like I said, I was confused. I thought that it was a render, or someone was just dreaming up some potential of what the pocket could be.
Could have been an AI rendering.
Yeah, someone was just dreaming up ideas. Little did I know it was an actual camera, and I remember I showed you, Zach.
Blew my mind. I have wanted the pocket cameras to look like this, to function like this for so long.
Yeah, and when I saw it, there really wasn't a lot of info on the forums. And so I found the guy that had posted it, and I shot him an email. I said, hey, I gotta know more. Like, what is going on here? What are you doing with this camera? This is amazing. This is such a cool mod. A few emails back and forth. Fast forward today, he shipped it over to us to check it out. It is a mod kit that he's been working on for a little while now. He has fully designed all this stuff. Right away, I'll say that it feels amazing. There's nothing about this mod that feels cheap. The enclosure that the LCD, the monitor is in, is super nice. It's a CNC'd, I believe, aluminum case. It feels solid. Frankly, it feels better build quality than the pockets itself. Essentially took out the screen from the back, put it up top, put the V-mount down here. So this is specifically made for kind of micro style V-mounts. If you do the really big normal size V-mounts, you do kind of have some blockage on the buttons, which, you know, in my mind, I don't know why you wouldn't want to use these little micro V-mounts. They're just a lot smaller, more compact to begin with. They work great. These are little 50 watt hour. These are the cheapest ones I could find, because I know sometimes I've heard in the past that comments about the V-mounts, they're not affordable, because Blackmagic's whole mantra is affordability and bringing cameras to the masses at an affordable price. These were 50 bucks on Black Friday. So basically the V-mounts just mount right onto the back like this. And what I love about this mod is, again, the Tilt-A-Mod, sure, you could put a V-mount here and flip the screen up. But the great thing is, the ability to have a solid point to shoot with and push against your body, where before, even with the 6K G2 or the new full frame, yeah, you can kind of do that, but you're just pushing a screen against your body. It's like a sharp edge. It doesn't feel comfortable, doesn't feel solid.
But also, you're having to put your head really far down. You're having to crank your neck down to see the display because it's right up against your chest. Whereas if you move the display a little bit further out, it's a little bit more comfortable to see.
Yeah, you have a really solid surface here, and it just works. Now, on top of that too is, yes, you can use V-mounts with pockets. This isn't anything new. But the great thing is you now have a V-mount on this without having to have a cable dangling from the side, without having to open this port and have a D-tap that could potentially fall out. It's just all contained. This feels like such a ready-to-go rig that you can shoot with. Pack a couple V-mounts and you're ready and good for a day. The monitor. This is the one thing when I saw it at first, I had a little mixed feelings. I loved, again, what was happening with this V-mount plate. This I wasn't so sure about, but I have to say, once we got our hands on it and actually got to play around and feel it in our hands and shoot with it, it makes so much sense. It works up top so well. I think it's true application where it shines the brightest and where this makes the most sense is for handheld shooting. It becomes so comfortable to use for that. So obviously we have a ribbon cable that comes up through the body. The hinge itself is just tied directly into the top where that 1/4-20 was. It's connected to the frame of the camera itself, the steel frame or the inside frame, not just the plastic. And like I said, this aluminum case on here that he CNC'd is so nice. I love the quality of it. Unlike the Tilta one, it's actually even bezels all the way around, so it doesn't look goofy like the Tilta one does. I really like how clean it looks. The hinge that he chose to go with on here, I believe he custom made this hinge himself, and it works so good.
It does look really good though. If you switched out that PodTech logo and you put a Blackmagic design logo on there, I would 100% believe you that this was a Blackmagic product.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's the thing. You wouldn't expect this quality out of a solo one-man band shop to be able to do something this great. And on top of that too, you've probably been noticing and wondering what is going on right here. So this is a prototype, but this is a 3D printed piece that he did here, and it is actually 2 cold shoe mounts. So when I talked with him, his whole thing with this was he wants to eliminate the need for having to rig the camera out, which I think he frankly did pretty dang well. And adding these 2 cold shoes makes a lot of sense because now you have the functionality of you're not forced to rig out your camera. If you need to use something like these small audio lavs, here's a receiver. This is a Hollyland Lark 150, but you can just pop it on the back here. And the great thing is when you add accessories like this, from our experience, the hinge is still great. It's not like it just falls down. Like I said, that tension is just perfect. You do lose the functionality of that 1/4-20 on top, but again, for what you gain, it's well worth it in my mind. When you flip it forward like this, you'll notice that with the body cap on, it is flush with the body cap. So not that you'd want to store it this way, but it's not like it protrudes way out in front of the body cap, which is really nice. I do want to talk about kind of some of the, maybe not cons, but some of the things to be aware of with this camera mod. Now, a lot of you may be looking at this and going, how am I going to fit my camera cage on it? Now, that is, again, what I asked Ollie first. One of the first things I asked Ollie when I talked with him was, I was like, okay, what about cages? And again, his thought was, here's a cage here, I'll show you in a second. But his thought with this was, again, building this and rigging this, modding this camera out in a way that you aren't forced to use a cage. And I think I had to stop for a second and go, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. But because these problems have been such an annoyance for us, we've always had cages on it, and we've done it no differently because you had to. But he did mention on top of that, there is still partial cage compatibility. So I did a quick Amazon search. I found this cheap $50 cage that disassembles into 4 pieces. Now, this is not the only one. I know the Tilta cage, I believe, does the same thing where it comes in multiple pieces. There's a lot of different cages like this that are, you can kind of choose which side you want. So you can still do something like this where the camera mounts on it. Yes, you do lose the top plate, but you still have all this side functionality if you want to do, you know, HDMI locks or anything for this where you're protecting these ports. You have that functionality, and it gives you a few more mounting points. But again, you don't need as many mounting points when you have everything built into the camera. The only cage functions you're losing is, again, that top plate and what would be a top handle. Now, that goes on to my second point in terms of maybe some cons that you might see in this camera, and that would be, you know, you do kind of lose that functionality of having a top handle. Now, I'm sure if you got creative, you could probably rig something out connecting to the bottom to 15mm rails. For us, while we have largely always had top handles on our cameras, I can honestly say that we rarely ever use them when it comes to actual filming. I mean, we typically just use them for carrying around and moving cameras from location to location, just as a quick grab and holding spot. But from an actual shooting functionality, it's something we just don't do. The only thing you are truly sacrificing with doing something like this is the ability to tap into the 12-volt power supply. So as you know, it's a 2-pin LEMO for this power supply with this camera. Because the V-mount basically runs and takes over that supply line or whatever it is, you cannot plug in and have wall power anymore with this camera through that port specifically. Now, that is something to keep in mind. Again, these cameras do run extremely long in our experience with something like a 98 watt-hour battery. This is one that we've used a ton. It's the Nano 98. They make the same battery in a 150. Now, with 2 of these 98 watt-hour batteries, you can pretty much run all day with these cameras. So again, yeah, it kind of sucks, but if you get some bigger batteries, it's really not a problem. And one of the great things I haven't touched on is, because you still keep the functionality to use this bottom battery, the awesome thing about this camera is, so I'll boot it up real quick here. So there you go, you got the camera operating, it's running. Because you're still running 2 batteries in here, you can essentially take off this V-mount, the camera continues to run. You have that hot swap redundancy with this camera that if your V-mount dies and you're not paying attention, you're fine. You have another 30, 40 minutes of runtime with this internal battery, and allows you to just keep this camera running nonstop. The other thing to keep in mind too is, so both of these batteries have it. I have a ZG Cine and this one's a cheap Power Extra one, but it's becoming more and more popular with these V-mount batteries is the integration of a USB-C port, which can be used for in and out functionality. That means that you can charge these batteries with USB-C or you can output with USB-C. So again, we haven't tested it, but I don't see any reason why you wouldn't be able to have this on a camera and run in a USB-C to this camera while it's on the camera, maybe doing an interview or something like that, and be simultaneously charging this camera as it's being drained. We have had applications where we're using these and we're charging these little V-mounts and using them. So again, I think that's another option. If you really need to hardwire or power this camera, you can just simply carry around a power delivery little battery bank with a USB-C cable, and you can be connected in and run more or less indefinitely depending on the charge rate of some of these batteries. But again, the great thing too is these aren't expensive batteries. This ZG Cine is a super reasonably priced battery. It has that power delivery, that USB-C. This one the same. And again, more and more batteries are adding that functionality. So that's another thing to keep in mind with these that I think is something that you wouldn't think of right away, but it's an option in terms of powering and adding additional juice to your camera. At this point, you're probably wondering, okay, what's the deal with it? Where can I get it? Fill us in. So as of right now, I don't know all the details. There is more information on all these Kickstarter pod tech. He has been working on this for a while. Again, he's been coming up with the design for this, and he's going to be selling this on a Kickstarter for, I think, around $300. Now that includes the CNC case, the plates, all the parts and tools that you'll need to do this, along with the guide that he'll be coming out with that kind of walks you through how to modify your camera. In the PDF and kind of in some of the documents he sent me, he did say that you don't need to be an expert in electronics to be able to do this. So from my understanding, it's something that if you have just a little bit of handy skills, you should be able to take this on no problem. I'm sure it takes a little bit of time to disassemble and everything. I think the only tool he did disclose that you will need for it is either a heat gun or a hair dryer, and that's for the screen removal of the case. But I think that's pretty dang reasonable for what you're getting. Obviously, got to put in a little bit of sweat to make it happen, but at $300, that is roughly around the same price that the Tilta-Mod came out with, and that was a couple years back now already. I think that one was like $280 or something.
Hey, going back to the self-install for just a second, I know that might intimidate people just a little bit depending on the process. You mentioned that the only tools that you need are like a hairdryer or a heat gun. Does that mean that you probably don't have to drill any holes into this thing?
As far as he said, the only permanent modification to the camera is there is on this cage where the ribbon cable comes out, supposedly, is that a little bit of material on the body itself needs to be removed, just a bit, with a file that he includes in the install kit right here, just to allow this ribbon cable to pass through. Otherwise, I think the ribbon cable would just be getting smashed. So it sounds like very little actual modification other than, you know, removing just a little bit of body, and then, yeah, removing the screen from the case itself, which is what the heat gun is for. But yeah, I don't think that there's any crazy things, because again, he said the only tools is the heat gun / hairdryer. All the rest of the tools are provided. To disclose, we did not do this modification, obviously. He sent us this as is. We've been pretty slammed with the studio and finishing off our warehouse build. But he sent it to us as is, but we do plan on doing it with our other cameras, just because honestly we love this design. It is so worth it to us. So we could certainly make a video future on about how that process goes. As far as I know, like I said, he will be coming out with a guide that kind of walks you through the steps of how to do it. If you are interested to know more about this, go check out his Kickstarter. I think it is so cool what he's doing. I think that something like this needs support. People have been talking about wanting a box style camera, and yes, this is not a box style camera, but this is one step closer to that. And I think showing support for a Kickstarter like this will send a message to Blackmagic of what the community wants. This is not a sponsored video in any way. This is not, we do not get to, I wish we could keep this camera, but the Kickstarter goes live today, and I'm not sure on the timeline, but I know he's wanting to get these manufactured. And a big part of doing the Kickstarter is because this is a kind of a custom designed and CNC'd aluminum enclosure for this monitor. If you were just doing a couple production runs on this, small runs on this, this is not a cheap item to just have done if you're doing a couple of them. So I know a big part of doing this Kickstarter is trying to get enough interest, trying to get enough backers that he can do a big batch of these to really cut down that cost, just because obviously something of this quality and just how great it is not cheap. I think it's really awesome that he's doing this, because I think there's probably cheaper ways to make an enclosure like this. But I think it's awesome that he chose to go with a way higher quality enclosure and a machined part like this. So that is part of the reason. If you like it, go back to Kickstarter.
Hey, one last question for me. Obviously, we have the 6K modded out, the original 6K. I think you mentioned that he's going to do the original 4K as well, but any word on whether or not he's going to do some of the newer models, like the 6K with the articulating screen or the full frame?
I did ask him, for those of you who are wondering, obviously this camera's been out for a while. I think that it still has a lot of horsepower and a long life ahead of it still, just because of its capabilities. But I did ask him, you know, well, what's the story on the 6K Pro, the 6K G2, and now the 6K full frame cameras? And he did comment that he doesn't want to make any promises, but if there would be potentially enough interest, that there's a chance that a mod kit for that would be coming out also down the road. Again, don't get your hopes up, but I do think that depending on how this Kickstarter will go, it will send a sign of what people want these cameras to be and how they want them to function. So with that, I think we've pretty much wrapped it up. Check out the Kickstarter. If you guys have questions, leave them in the comments below. If there's something you want us to check out with it, or if there's something that we didn't cover, please let us know. Ask in the comments. We'll get back to you. And then hopefully the rest of the information should be on the Kickstarter, which we will also link down below. So thank you for watching. We appreciate it, guys. With that, have a good one, and we'll see you in the next video.
See ya. Thanks for watching. Subscribe.
If you like this, if you want to see more, keep subscribing. Got to keep everyone excited, and we want to keep doing these videos for you guys. So hit that subscribe button.